A Dharma message will now be given by Terry Jigen Hollowell, who will be speaking about the women in Keizan Zenji's life. Jigen serves as the corresponding secretary on both the Daifukuji board and the Fujinkai board. She is also a member of the Zazenkai, Baikako, Samu, and Dharma study groups. She is heading the board's project to have the altar figures of Dogen Zenji and Keizan Zenji cleaned and repaired. Keizan Zenji was the fourth ancestor after Dogen Zenji in the Japanese Soto Zen lineage. He was born in 1264 and passed away in 1325. He is regarded as the great propagator of the Soto Zen sect throughout Japan, and along with Dogen Zenji is an eminent ancestor of our tradition.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to speak about Keizan Zenji and women. We're going to touch on how Dogen and Keizan and why they are important to Soto Zen first, so you can get kind of a background. And then we're going to meet Sonin and Ekkyu, which were two of Keizan's women disciples. And then we're going to talk about women during Keizan's time, which was the late 1200s in Japan, around 800 years ago, and how mothers were used as cautionary tales for young monks, how women contributed to the number of Buddhist temples in Japan, and how women discovered the power of a name. And we will ask, was there really equality for women in Keizan's Japan in the late 1200s? So let's get started. Dogen lived first. He was born in 1200 and lived to 1253. He was the founder of our Soto Zen school in Japan, a prolific writer and philosopher. Keizan was born after Dogen died. He lived from 1268 to 1325. Keizan spread teaching and increased interest in the general population of Japan for Soto Zen Buddhism. He understood that the ordinary person needed funeral and memorial services to give them peace, and he used it as a teaching tool. So briefly, we have the two ancestors of the Soto school. Dogen, who was pure in the way he regarded Zen. Keizan, who was more eclectic because he was choosing from many different schools and teachings. Dogen, who was an elitist. He liked to sit in his room and meditate. And then there was Keizan, who preferred to be out with the common folks and to be teaching for the common good. Dogen, who was monastic. He liked his monastery. He enjoyed teaching his students. And Keizan, who was accessible to the lay people. He was busy building temples and getting more people to come to his services. Dogen, we could say, was inward. Keizan, outward. Dogen was known as the High Patriarch. Keizan as the Great Patriarch. Now, we have a statue of each one of these gentlemen in our temple. Dogen is to the far side in his niche, and Keizan is closer to me. Reverend Jiko and I and the board are working to refurbish our old statues of, our Japanese statues of Dogen and Keizan. And the one thing that I want to bring to your mind is that you can see with Dogen, he has serious dark clothing and a serious face. And when we were working with the statues with the art historian from Honolulu, it was really interesting to look at Kazan, because if you see him up close, he has smile wrinkles on his face. And he also has jazzy colored robes with a lot of gold on. So there really is a difference between the two patriarchs and ancestors of the Soto Zen. Kazan grew up devoted to his mother and grandmother, who were both devoted to Zen Buddhism. His grandmother was a Zen Buddhist nun who had actually received teachings from Dogen, and his mother became an abbess at a Zen convent. Kazan also had devout faith in Kannon Bodhisattva, who in Zen Buddhism takes on the female attributes. She often visited him in his dreams. Sonin was a benefactor and student of Kazan. She gave him land and she gave him money to build Yokuji temple. Kazan even dedicated a special Kannon hall at this temple to his grandmother and let Sonin use it as her own chapel. He said Sonin was the reincarnation of his grandmother and said that he and she were inseparable. He gave precepts to Sonin and also gave them to Sonin's mother. And upon her mother's death, he directed monks to hold monthly annual services in the mother's honor. He said, "You should revere patrons as you would the Buddha, regardless of their sex." Ikkyu was the first Japanese nun known to have received Soto Dharma transmission from Kazan. She was Kazan's disciple. And early on, Kazan helped her by giving her Dogen's texts to study, and he personally transcribed them from the Chinese to the Japanese, which could not have been a simple or easy task. In ancient Japan, women were seen more often as men, as shamanistic diviners. As Buddhism became popular in Japan, these functions that were performed by female shamans came to be performed mainly by male Buddhist ascetics or mountain priests. Ahead of his time, Kazan, emphasizing equality of men and women, actually promoted his women to become resident priests. This was groundbreaking, and Kazan is thought to be the origin of the organization of Soto Zen school nuns, of which Sonin and Ikkyu were two. They both became abbesses at nunneries that Kazan began. Unlike the Chinese Confucianist ancestor cult that centered on fathers, the Japanese and sometimes Chinese Buddhism seems to pay more attention to female ancestors. Many times, however, what we would see as a cold sacrifice in our 21st century lifetime is used as a teaching to ending clinging to a temporary body, such as the story of Patriarch Dongshan Lianji's mother. She was destitute. She was reduced to begging. And Dongshan was a monk in a monastery. And he ignored her. She was begging on the streets and finally found him in the monastery, but he wouldn't see her. She died of grief on his doorstep. Dongshan picked up the rice that she had had with her when she died and mixed it into the breakfast gruel of his community as a funeral offering. Now, That doesn't seem like too thankful for a thing for a son to do for a father as far as we're concerned. But at that time, it was seen that as a wonderful thing. His mother later gave thanks to him in a dream for the proof of his steadfastness, and thanks that she had been able to put aside her illusion of attachment and be reborn in heaven. Keisan comments, although all masters and patriarchs excel virtue, Dongshan, the founder of our school, contributed especially to promote its style. This is due to the power he achieved by forsaking his parents and keeping his purpose. I wonder if this was a helpful story to keep young monks in monasteries, away from grieving mothers who fervently wish their sons to return home. But who knows? Women in Keisan's time were simply identified by names of their clan. There were no personal names. It was only when they become ordained Buddhists, alive or at their funerals, that they obtained a personal religious name. So, widows became nuns in large number to achieve the power of having their own name. Women at this time could inherit land from their husband and hold it during their lifetime, but they would lose it to a son designated by the dead father when she died, and if she remarried, her property would go to her new husband's sons. So, this is why many widows, or wives with aging husbands and no sons, put themselves under the care of a Buddhist institution and transferred their property to the temples. From records, we know that Keisan used this law a great deal to acquire goods and property for temples. So, women contributed a great deal to the growing number of Zen temples in Japan, because it was one way that they could hold on to their power. The position of women in this age was that of complete subordination. Zen texts by Dogen offer many passages insisting on equality between men and women, especially when discussing the ultimate goal of awakening, because he believed anyone could awaken. Equality rarely became practiced, however. Women like the nuns, Sonin or Ikkyu, were not ever mentioned. In the spiritual line of succession of Keisan, even though they were given Dharma transmission by him, many of the nuns were never mentioned. Probably because this was all written by men. Zen, unlike Taoism, did not assert the value of femininity. That seems to have attracted a large amount of noble women with property, and there was a certain fear and heightened awareness of the dangers that a feminine presence could bring to a community of young monks in a monastery. Rightly so, I can imagine. The fact remains that even with Keisan's devotion to the cause of women, most legends in the Soto tradition concern male monks, and Keisan's examples appear to be the exception to the rules. I hope you've enjoyed meeting and learning a little bit more about Dogen and Keisan, and Sonin and Ikkyu, and have increased your knowledge of why women became nuns in Japan in the 1200s, and of Keisan's influence on women in Buddhism. Thank you very much.